We added our first simple route in an extra file here to keep our app.js file lean. Now, as I mentioned though, this isn't even a route which we need. We need get routes in the places area, but we need routes for a specific user ID or a specific place ID. We also need other routes like post, patch, and delete. So let's work on that now. Let's also make sure that we only reach our places routes if the request starts with /API/places as indicated on that slide, and not with /nothing as it's currently the case. Because we also want to be able to use /API/users to later reach our users routes. So for that, back in our application, to make sure that we only make it to these places routes if the request starts with /API/places, we have to add a filter here on this middleware in the app.js file. Now, when using the use method, you don't have to add a path filter, but you can. Then this filter will also not be treated as this has to be the exact path filter, but as the path has to start with the specified path filter. That means that here as a first argument, we can add /API/places, and Express.js will now only forward requests to our places routes middleware, so to the routes configured here, if their path starts with /API/places. It can be longer than that, so it can be /API/places/something. It will still be forwarded. But for example, just /API/nothing would not be forwarded to places routes. So with that, if we change this, we make sure that if we reload here, this does not work anymore, because now our route here, /nothing, actually has to be prepended with /API/places. And that's also important. The route filter you set up here is automatically added to the filter you have here. So if you want to have requests which start with /API/places, you must not repeat that here. Instead, here you only add the path after that initial filter you have in app.js already. So here that simply means just API/places/nothing should trigger this function. So here, if we now enter API/places, we get our message again. This works. But of course, whilst it's nice that this works, this isn't really the logic we need here. Instead, if we have a look at our plan again, we need a get route which has /user/some user ID in it, or which just searches for a specific place ID. And to practice that, let's actually add a constant here in places routes, dummy places, which will later in the course be replaced by our database access in the end. But here, let's just store some dummy places for the moment. And every place could have an ID, P1, could have a title, for example, Empire State Building, could have a description, one of the most famous skyscrapers in the world. A location, which actually should be a nested object with a latitude and a longitude. And here I simply used Google Maps to search for that. So I'll paste in the values. You can simply use Google Maps and search for the Empire State Building to then find the latitude and longitude here in the URL. The thing after the @ is the latitude. The thing after the comma thereafter, before the next comma, is the longitude. So that's what I simply pasted in here. Then the address, which I'll also simply paste from Google Maps. And a creator field, which points at a fictional user ID, because we have no real users at the moment, U1, which I would say is the user who created that place. Later, of course, we will have real users and linked up models. We'll have users connected to places. For now, we'll just work with the dummy data. So now we have a place which we could try to get by its ID. So actually here, I want to have a GET request where the ID is part of the URL. So the idea is that we send a request to API/places/P1, for example, and this gives us the data for the place with the ID P1. So the ID should be encoded in the URL. That's a typical pattern you see in such APIs in reality. To tell Express that we have a dynamic segment which we don't know in advance, because of course I can't say I want to load something for P1, because later we'll have more places with different IDs. So to tell Express that we have a dynamic segment where we don't know the exact value in advance, but where we want to be able to later use it in this middleware function and find a place by the concrete value which was entered, we add a colon here in our filter, and then any identifier of our choice, for example, place ID or just PID for place ID. Now, Express.js accepts this route here. If I save this and I reload this URL with places/p1, we see we make it into this middleware function, and that's great. But now I also want to return that place with that ID, which I conveniently have here because I added it as a dummy place. For that, we need to extract the concrete value that was entered for this concrete request, which reaches this function. And Express.js has got us covered with that too. We can get the place ID by using the request object, and there you will have a params property. This is added by Express.js. The params property in the end holds an object where your dynamic segments here will exist as keys, and the value will be the concrete value the user who sent the request entered. So here we can access request params.pid and get the concrete ID that is encoded in the URL. Well, and now we can search for a place with that ID in the dummy places array and add that to the response we're sending back. So here we can get our place by reaching out to dummy places and using the find method, which is a default JavaScript array method. It helps us find a specific element in an array. Find takes a function which we pass to it, which will be executed on every element in the array, and the element it's currently looking at will be fed into the function as an argument. So the place in this case, which I'll just name P here in the argument to not clash with this constant name. Then here in this find function, we have to return true if we're looking at the place which we want to find. So here I will return p.id equal place ID. So I'm comparing the ID of the place I'm currently looking at, and keep in mind this function here executes on all elements in this array. Of course, here we only have one, but if we had more than one, it would execute on all of them. And it will then return true if the ID of the place it's currently looking at is equal to the ID that was part of our URL. And then here, instead of returning some message, I can return the place here in my response. This syntax here, by the way, can also be shortened to this. That is default JavaScript. It in the end means that JavaScript automatically expands this to this. If the name of the property is equal to the name of the variable that holds the value you want to store in the property, you can shorten it. And with that, if we now save this and we reload this page, you see indeed here I get back that place data. I get back that place data because I entered a valid ID. If I, for example, would try to find the place with the ID P2, which I don't have here in my dummy places, you would see I get back an empty object because there is no place which I found, so there is no place added to this object. Of course, in such a case where we didn't find a place, we might want to handle this error differently and return a 404 error, for example. But we'll have a look at error handling a little later. For now, let's leave it as it is and instead work on another route. Let's implement that get/user/:UID route here. And that is actually a great practice for you. We'll implement it together in the next lecture. But here it's your job to instead write a new route that is able to accept this dynamic UID segment, extract it in the middleware function then, and find a place where the creator has that user ID. You learned everything you need for that in the last lectures, so definitely try it on your own first before we then do it together in the next lecture.